Welcome back. Terrorists can inflict heartbreaking loss of life and costly destruction of property. Analysts have explored the question of whether terrorism can also hurt a developing nation's economic growth, the ability to attract foreign investment and trade flows. With the attacks that happened in Kenya yesterday, we look at how terrorism can have an economic impact that extends far beyond the violent act itself. On the line is Ryan Cummings, the Director of Africa-focused political and security risk management consultancy, Signal Risk. He's also a founding member of the Nigerian Security Network. Good afternoon to you, Ryan.
Hi there.
Well, Kenya has had political uncertainty after the elections last year. Now, it's another terrorist attack. So what is at stake for the economy of that country with these kinds of incidents which have heightened political and security risk?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we look at some of these political developments, they obviously do not portend, positively on a country's prospects as being a key destination for investment or even for tourism. But I think with Kenya, and specifically with the terrorist attack that we saw yesterday and also with the elections, these are kind of, for the most part, once-off events. So any kind of economic fallout as a response to these incidents are going to be short-lived. And because the impact doesn't extend over a protracted period, and I'm specifically relating to Kenya's most recent elections and obviously the recent terrorist attack in Nairobi, because the impact is short-lived, the overall impact on the economy as well doesn't tend to be of a significant duration.
So for any company to consider investing in Kenya, it would need guaranteed security and political certainty if the attacks are orchestrated from within by Al-Shabaab. So it cannot be guaranteed that they won't strike again. So it puts the nation in limbo. So would anyone really think of expanding business into Kenya if there are sporadic attacks?
Well, I think the key issue is are we having similar discussions when we see terrorist attacks in parts of Europe or parts of the developed world, which still serve as quite major commercial and financial hubs, and we don't. I think the key issue with Kenya is that it's a country, like many countries on the African continent, but also in Europe and North America, as I alluded to, where they are under significant terrorist threats, but where we do see that there isn't a high frequency of terrorist attacks. And that does speak still to a state security apparatus that has been managing the threat as effectively as possible, and that has probably thwarted many more or several more attacks that's actually been successfully executed, but that, by the law of averages, that there will be these continuous threats and continuous attempts at acts of mass casualties, and every so often there will be one incident that is successfully executed.
Yeah, well, I think that you have a point, because one would think about the attacks in France, and then after that, it's so quiet, everybody is sipping champagne, and then we're not talking about the attacks there. So surely one can agree with you, but then, the people who are targets here are usually foreigners, especially in hotels. And the previous attacks were on the U.S. Embassy. So are bilateral economic relations going to be affected if governments whose citizens are affected feel that their citizens are like birds sitting on a wire, and there are travel warnings as well?
I think with all of these countries, United States, France, UK, more recently lost foreign nationals in attacks of violence in Kenyan territory, all have an appreciation for the fact that their countries themselves are susceptible to such acts of mass violence. And I think what we will eventually see is greater coordination and intelligence sharing and just basically joint training initiatives that countering terrorism, and which makes countries such as Kenya and other major nations on the African continent more robust in their overall counterterrorism response, and also ensure that security agencies of African countries, in conjunction with those of European and North American nations, are continuously sharing intelligence on what is certainly a global threat and not something that's specific to Kenya or specific to the African continent.
Yeah, when we talk investment, one needs to be guaranteed that they will get their money back. And even insurance companies would be wary. So how can the Kenyan intelligence infiltrate and uproot Al-Shabaab if it's an inbound terrorist organization recruiting suicide bombers from within the country's borders? Because that's what the country desperately needs now to convince investors that come to Kenya, we are open for business. But can they say, but be aware, a bomb can explode at any time?
So I think that at the end of the day, there's obviously for any kind of, what forms of, because investment is what based. And, if you're looking at companies that are specifically looking to open up manufacturing plants or business premises, whatever the case may be, one also has to kind of manage in terms of what the frequency of violence is and whether violence is directed in any specific sector. So when we see attacks in Nairobi, yes, it's targeting shopping centers, it's targeting office complexes. So therefore, companies that are seeking investment have specific concerns, but will also take their own initiatives to ensure that their assets within the country is secured, because it's not, in any capacity, it's not, the security of an asset is not something that one can just leave to the state. And I think South Africa is quite a perfect example of that, given the robust private security industry we see here. So, companies have their own duty of care, but they'll also discern from the fact that, we don't have, for example, in Libya or other countries where terrorism specifically targets perhaps an oil sector or targets, a tourism industry, as we see in Tunisia, for example. And so different forms of investors will have a different risk appetite when looking at Kenya. Some might feel a bit risk averse to push money or push investments into the country. Others may feel that, the purposes of their businesses might be completely immune to the acts of violence that are perpetrated by groups such as Al-Shabaab.
All right, Ryan Cummings, thank you very much for making time to speak to us, and hoping that the intelligence will be on their toes when dealing with this, because I've been seeing some of them with guns but wearing sandals when going to a crime scene. Is something really concerning. But Ryan Cummings is speaking to us live from Cape Town. He's the director of Africa-focused political and security risk management consultancy, and we're going to take a break now. When we come back, the